IndiGo's meltdown over the past week that left thousands of passengers stranded at airports marks the worst aviation crisis in the country's history. More than 2,000 flights were cancelled and many more delayed, with the disruption to lives far more damaging than the individual stories doing the rounds. To put that into context, IndiGo controls over 60% of India's fast-growing aviation market. The next closest is Air India Group, and on the periphery, smaller carriers are there, but powerless to make a difference. Chronic policy failure and regulatory delay are directly responsible for the monopoly-like situation. The country's reluctance to liberalize air travel and open up the sector to foreign players has made it one of the most expensive domestic aviation markets. India's aviation regulator, under pressure, has issued a show cause notice to IndiGo CEO to explain the mess. The airline's management is yet to respond to regulators' order. IndiGo's claims of operations returning to normalcy is just another band-aid for a completely different ailment. More importantly, there are no assurances of something like this will not happen again. Indian citizens wait to see what real action will be taken to make IndiGo accountable for this mess. IndiGo, for its part, has issued standard templated statements with an apology for the inconvenience. But it was more than mere inconvenience. As for several thousand, it was a total mess. No communication of what is next, no food or water for stranded passengers, and for many, airports had turned into hotels without privacy. Well, let's not even look at the cost of air tickets and hotels skyrocketing to eye-watering levels. The aviation ministry finally ordered a cap on airfares, but many passengers who had a harrowing experience say that it is too little and too late, as the damage was already done. Many stories of stranded passengers missing out on important events in their life, financial losses, missed connecting flights, have been flowing. That also includes a wedding reception of a couple who had to make do with a digital presence from the airport. The scenes of chaos and angry passengers screaming at IndiGo staff at various airports were the norm over the past week. But the true damage is far deeper than what those visuals convey. What India does to make a private firm accountable for the mess and stop future disruptions will be important. Now, to discuss the situation more, we are being joined by Subhash Chandra Garg, former Finance Secretary of India. He's joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Let's begin by asking, what's your take on this whole IndiGo mess? It is one of the most reliable, could have been a reliable airfare, airlines, and now this all mess has happened, which is making people angry. What is your take on this?
Yeah, this is a true tragedy in India's infrastructure in the aviation sector. IndiGo had built a very good brand, very nice, good, efficient services, and 20 years of history, track record to boast about. That is what got it so much of high share, 65% of the Indian aviation market. And suddenly, in a week, everything collapses. And you have the worst of airline crisis in India. That calls for understanding the deeper reason why this mess had to happen. In my judgment, the primary reason was that IndiGo perhaps got too ambitious, or hubris caught up with it when they increased the winter schedule of December by about 10% from the October schedule, and they had been running shortage of pilots. And suddenly when you expand the flights by 10% and you don't have the pilots, that is what led to a lot of cancellations and chaos, and this is what. So I think there are a lot of inquiries going on. Government has also regulator has taken some steps, relax the pilots' duty charts and the fatigue rules for 2 months. The government has said we'll cap the airfares. But these are not, to my mind, the solutions. The diagnosis requires first to assess and find out who had allowed 10% increase in winter schedule without increase or availability of pilots.
Absolutely.
That's the fundamental, the root cause of it. And in this, it seems to me that everyone is collusion. IndiGo, of course, to get more income, wanted higher flights. Regulator was sleeping. It did not do any, did not take any action and approved the schedule. When knowing that they don't have the, so why did they do it?
Absolutely.
And once this crisis got created, it was more of a panic reaction, a mismanagement kind of reaction from everybody, rather than a kind of right reaction. The only thing which should have been done at that time is to ask IndiGo to come back to the old schedule, take out the extra flights, and manage the situation in next 2-3 days. But instead of doing that, the regulator tried to compound the problem by saying that we will dispense the rule. Now, that rule is very much necessary for the safety of the passengers and all, and has rightly been objected by the pilots association. And when the pilots reacted, the IndiGo has not been able to increase the flights to that. In fact, they're running currently the schedules which are much less. So I don't think it's a monopoly problem, but it's a grossly mismanagement and the hubris which has caught up, and a sleeping, negligent regulator and the policymakers. I think that's where the problem lies.
Yes, and that is, of course, not expected from IndiGo, which controls about 60% of India's fastest-growing aviation sector. Also, how would you describe this extreme concentration of, because you mentioned that, of course, it is still a concentration of from a policy and regulatory perspective, because when you talk about this law that was released, especially at a season where this is the holiday season, especially the holiday season when people are traveling. So why would they choose to do this right now? And also the response of other airlines, because we look at the airfares of different airlines, 90,000. They're going for a flight from Delhi to Mumbai. Would that be? That's a cost that for the air tickets? It's extremely, for a person who needs to go for an emergency, who does not know, and is not even clear that if that flight of 90,000 rupees would be cancelled. How do you assess this management, not just from IndiGo, but other airlines as well?
So, see, this is a very major economic issue. When the demand is very high and the supply gets reduced, how do you resolve and bring balance? There are two ways. One is the market solution, which is that you increase the fare, and so that the demand drops off.
Right.
People don't, those who can't afford that kind of fare don't buy. They go to other means and all. So that is what. So I don't hold the other lines responsible for increasing the fare. That's a market solution. They have a limited capacity and so much of demand. Now, if you don't want market solution, you want an administrative kind of solution, which the government has done by capping the fare. That solution doesn't result into bringing demand-supply balance. What it does is that it leads to rationing and control of the seats which are available. I don't know who gets the seat at the lower fare. When you have limited number, for a seat which is, let us say, going for 10,000 rupees, for one seat there are four people demanding that. Who gets that seat? It's either first come, first served. So immediately somebody caps. You may relate to a kind of experience which happens in the railways with the Tatkal kind of ticket, where every ticket is virtually captured by the mafia and the gangs, and it's not available. Here, these seats might have gone into the government and somebody's controller's quota. So it will be sold. This will not be able. So I don't find that this administrative solution is the right solution. The market solution is actually a much better solution. So I don't blame for that.
Yeah. And also, of course, it also shows how IndiGo had basically dominated. And if something goes wrong there, it disrupts everything. In that case, will India be forced now to liberalize and open up the aviation sector?
See, there are domestic liberalization is there. Anyone can enter. You have small airlines coming up, Akasha and others have tried to cap it. And the Indian aviation has seen many new sort of airlines coming. They were not successful. Some got sold, some got grounded, some got merged with others. So there is no domestic monopolization or the policy problem as far as the domestic sector is concerned, or domestic airlines or operators are concerned. It's not there. Of course, India doesn't permit the foreigners to run domestic airlines, which almost any country in the world doesn't do it. So that opening the domestic sector for the foreign airlines is not likely to be the case. By the way, IndiGo's 60% or 65% share is not reflective of a classical monopoly. So whenever a classical monopoly takes over, the pricing power gets into the hands of the monopoly operator. IndiGo, by the way, there is no complaint that in normal times, IndiGo's fare are off market or very high, or the aviation is becoming very costly. That's not the case. In fact, the IndiGo's strategy, to my mind, appears to be that you keep the fare low, connect and get more and more passengers shift to the airline. So the typical or classical monopolist's curse or problem is not evident in the Indian aviation sector. So I don't think that's the thing to be attacked. That's an inappropriate or suboptimal kind of diagnosis which the people are doing. And suppose you want to you want to control the IndiGo share and bring it down to, let's say, 25 or 30%. The only solution is to break this up into two airlines. You can't get the new ones to catch up. That's not. And breaking up the airline into two or three is almost a very impossible kind of thing. Americans are trying to break up the WhatsApp and others. They have not been able to do it. 100 years back, they broke the oil sector, that Standard Oil. So I don't think those solutions there. So let us not look at those solutions. Let us look at expanding and better managing. So the regulator must manage to see that there are adequate pilots to run the airlines. There is adequate slot. There is no excessive pricing, which is not the case. So let's look for the right solutions rather than the wrong solutions.
Right. That's very interesting you point raised, because it's what everyone must be thinking about is, okay, if one airline does not do it, why don't we have other airlines? That's an interesting point you just pointed out there. Of course, look for the problem, what the problem is, and then search for the solution for that. Thank you so much for coming on the broadcast and giving your perspective.
Thank you.